Hey, you. Yes, you, the listener. Before we start the show, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Producer Head only exists because of supporters like you who take this one simple action. It costs nothing and means everything to us as we continue to build this community together and bring in more and more top tier producers to share what they know directly with us. The bigger our community grows, the more we can all level up together. All right, I appreciate you. Now let's get into it. Yo, what's up? This is Toru, music producer, entrepreneur, and host of this show, Producer Head. Welcome to my conversation with Basic Printer. Basic Printer is an artist who embodies authenticity and has built a dedicated fan base through his unique approach to independent music. His philosophy of being a full-stack musician encompasses everything from songwriting and production to marketing and business development. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Basic Printer. What's up, everybody? This is Toru, and in a way, so are you. Welcome back to another episode of Producer Head. Today, Basic Printer is here with us. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. I've seen your clips and things, and we have some mutuals. So I've always been like kind of looking over the fence, kind of wondering if this day would come.
Yeah, man. Stalking sometimes results in happy endings. So, man, I want to drop in because I think your mentality about independent music is really super interesting, and I think everybody listening is going to take a lot of food for thought away from this. And when I asked you, like, kind of the way that you thought about it, you were like, independent musicians need to have like a full stack mentality, and that's the way that you approach what it is that you do. So, tell us about what you mean when you say being, approaching music with a full stack mindset or being a full stack musician.
I think it kind of starts with like definitionally. It's like you're independent, and like okay, that doesn't mean individual, right? It doesn't mean like you are on your own exactly, but it does mean that this starts and ends with you. Whatever if it's gonna be if it's gonna wind up being a team of sorts, well, it has to start with your plan and your vision. And so it's kind of like, well, you have to know how to create a plan or vision, which means you have to know what's out there to be even done in the first place. Most of the musicians I know are not doing it. Maybe they are acting as a hobbyist from time to time, but I think if you were to ask them, they would say they're taking it seriously and would like to be the biggest artist in the world. They would like that. So it's kind of like, well, there is a road to run between here and that dream that won't just show up for you. So kind of when I say like the full stack viewpoint, it's like, well, you should have a plan you should be interested in at least having the next few lily pads figured out of like, well, how do I get to my next show? Or how do I get to the point of like releasing a vinyl record or something? And even those two things, maybe years of wondering and wandering and trying stuff, before you figure out like the basics of, the financial end and working with people and practicing or whatever thing you're trying to do. But yeah, I guess to wrap that up, like there's just making music, and then there's interfacing it with the world, and that interfacing it with the world is a huge thing to figure out. It's a huge Rubik's cube to solve.
Why do you think like the full stack mentality or approach is important to embrace as an independent artist?
Well, there's sort of like a helplessness if you don't, I guess. Like, I don't want to denigrate anybody's situation. This is obviously just my philosophy, but I'm kind of like, if you're a musician, you better be able to produce a recording. Like, you better be able to be a musician and be like, I make music. Here was the music I made. It is complete. It is done. I've thought about every corner of it. And there's so many people who, they can write a fantastic song, but they, for some reason, block the rest of the process away and say, I can't do that. I have to hand it off to 86 different people. And it's kind of like, if you have that mentality, you're just, it's a huge limitation. And you're kind of trading in, I guess, technical skills for maybe like networking skills or other skills, which I don't know. I guess I was born into a life where I was more interested in like tinkering with things and making music and producing it, recording it, and doing that whole thing and marketing it. I guess I was just naturally interested in doing everything. But looking at the other side of the fence, I'm like, man, how does everyone not have a natural interest in this? If because when I'm looking at what I want to do, it's so tantalizing to me that everything along the way is also tantalizing. Like now it's fun to do oh my god, I have to register as a business in Tennessee. That'll be kind of fun now. It doesn't sound like a headache. It sounds inspiring. The road is long and strange no matter what. So embrace learning that map.
So you mentioned this idea of having a plan. And I really like what I hear is kind of these two kind of big pieces of it, right? One is like creating a plan, which kind of behind that is like you kind of mentioned, like looking around, like research, right? Like assessing like maybe what you would model a plan after. Like you're not going to be the first person to do this, right? The second piece is once you have that plan, like kind of this accountability piece, you have the plan. Okay, now you actually have to execute on the plan that you made. Everybody's plan is going to be specific to them. However, there are probably common components that exist of like a good structured plan or a way to assess whether or not you've made like a cohesive and effective plan that's worth trying to execute. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that as well as like the accountability piece I really love because it's like you can have a great plan, but if you don't do anything, well, it's really just almost like kind of almost like a dream, like, something that just passed. So the other thing is ideas for like the challenges of maintaining accountability to the plan also, along with like kind of this sense of, as you mentioned, like tantalizing things come up along the way. You're in the process of executing a plan, something else comes up. And now you're like, oh, is this worth adapting the plan? Should the plan change? To what extent? How do I know when it should be like, ignore that shiny thing and keep going, or that shiny thing is worthwhile and I need to actually kind of pivot my plan some. So I know I just asked you a lot there.
Well, okay. I might have like a lot of non-answers on this conversation, but because I almost see a plan as a trick of the mind, or maybe self-accountability. I'm just like, well, we said we're doing this to ourselves. That just gets you out of the chair and living life. If my plan is to play a show for the first time, that's going to lead me to, oh, should I in-ear monitors? Should that be a thing? Oh, now I'm learning about that. Or, oh, I working with this drummer and I'm like, wow, I've never played with a drummer. This is got to learn that and whatever. And that all builds until the show, which is, I don't know, maybe 6 months away. And by the time you're there, it's not even like you don't have a graduation party. I mean, actually, you kind of do sometimes. You might have a nice night out right after that show to like celebrate. But by the time that happens, you're not remembering like sitting at your desk being like, I want to play a show this year. You're like, whoa, I'm a musician. Oh, we got offered the next show. And you outgrow these plans. And I guess what I'm trying to distinguish here is like there's someone who lives and dies by like to-do lists or something. And then there's people who are more like instinctively moving through life and like finding inspiration and then finding more inspiration and then chasing a good thing that emerges from another thing, and it just living that like musician lifestyle and letting it like divine itself into something you're proud of and continually proud of and is fulfilling, because like there's definitely been many times in my years past where I was like, man, I would be so happy. Like, I don't need more than this. If I press my album to vinyl, like I could be done with this and be happy about it. And now I've done that 7 times, and it's like that little mini dream doesn't have much currency to me now. Not that the gratitude isn't there, but what I'm circling here is like the inspiration and the motivation is a little bit inherent, I would think. Like, if you can execute a plan for your music, I don't really buy that you're having a great time making music. It's like that always confused me. It's like oh, if you love making music so much, yet hate everything about it and everything about doing it, like I don't really know that you want to do this very much, And I think no one says that enough to where it's like, hey, if you're laying plan after plan and just can't find motivation, can't hold yourself accountable to it, no one's gonna tar and feather you for 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 being like, maybe I don't like this very much.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point to be like, maybe you're pointing yourself in a direction that you don't actually want to be in on a deeper level.
When you make your first song, right? Everyone kind of looks at you and is like, they almost put it on your plate for you, like, oh, like, are you gonna do some shows? Or like, oh, do you think you're gonna like shop this around? And the world starts to kind of ask, like, how serious are you? And I think some people can get pulled into that direction and not ever wonder, like, wait, I just wanted to like make beats, and that was literally it. Like, if it bloomed into something cool, that would be sweet. But like, I didn't come out here saying like, I will be on the Grammy stage in 10 years. Like, and you can just give yourself permission to be like, all right, I don't need to do that or think of it that way.
So it sounds like I like how you kind of like, there are two types of people in a way, is what you said a moment ago, right? There are like to-do list people, and there are more kind of intuitive people. And it sounds like you're describing yourself as the latter, as a more intuitive person. And I'm wondering if you can talk to how you connect and learn to listen to your intuition, because I do think that a lot of us have better intuition than we think that we do, and we second guess it a lot. And it sounds like that's something you've learned to navigate really well for yourself.
Yeah, well, we might be backing up into some pretty like meta, like non-musical things, right? Because it's kind of like somebody with really really struggling with their mental health, let's say, probably doesn't have the most transparent understanding of themselves or reality at that moment to breathe through life and let inspiration flow, let's say. So like, I guess my point there is to say, okay, how do you be a more intuitive musician? Well, part of it is like clearing your mind and knowing like what are you doing here, and what do you want, and like it's a tug of war, like for myself, I would think for everyone. But there's times all the time I'm like, is this a good stress or a bad stress? Because like if I got into music to just be beat down and try to buy, like on the road or whatever, that's not a good thing for me. And if you don't know what's good for you and what is, I think that's a tricky scenario. But like, for example, this tour I went on last fall was a huge endeavor, and it put me in a lot of debt, which was somewhat self-imposed. Like I could have maybe avoided that if I was more frugal, or like, really nailed the sort of Tetris of that. But I embraced it and I was like, we'll figure it out later. And this is the year where I'm figuring it out, and it's being figured out. It's going pretty well, but it's like, it's really life being like, is it this important to you to be playing music? And it's like thoughtlessly, yes. Because that was probably the best time of my life, that tour. So it's just like, to try to bring it back to your question, like all the time you're facing those trade-offs. Is preparing for this show worth it? I'm so stressed, I'm so scared. Or learning all this music for this other band, or they want this beat by Tuesday, like, and now I'm in this hellhole. Am I happy about that? Can I distinguish like this is good stress, like I'm in the gym right now? Because the alternative to all of this is just like watching Netflix every day and having like a pretty low key life. I wouldn't be feeling the stress every day, but I probably would be trading in that stress for sort of a low grade existential dread.
What's an indicator for you between what's like positive or productive versus unneeded or unnecessary stress in your life?
It's kind of like when you're in the wrong relationship, and you just know in your heart of hearts, like it's only you saying it to yourself in a certain moment of the day where you're like, I just keep imagining myself not in this relationship and it feels really nice. You're talking to your friends, they're kind of like, seems like it's going good for you, or your parents like them, and you kind of are saying, yeah, it is going good. And then but that true feeling of like, man, it does feel good to be released of this. And that is a whole, again, the backing up into these sort of meta concepts. But like, that is extremely hard, even for me, to knowing that about myself. Like, it's hard to feel that and then execute on it. But that is kind of like a similar compass, I think. Like sometimes you're in the middle of a musical thing and you're in the middle of some slog or some scary thing, or you're like having a bout with stage fright. Like there was a moment on the tour where we were in San Diego. It's like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, there was just this dip in my confidence where I was like, holy shit, does all of my music sound like the Wiggles? And I'm just now realizing, you know what I mean? And I was like talking to my keyboardist, being like, all of a sudden it sounds kind of fucking horrible to be like, am I really going to stand by this stuff I made and show it to hundreds more people? And you just know when that's a real voice or like the devil, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know. Again, so I'm not really giving you a practical answer, but I'm kind of saying you have probably felt that in your life before, of like what really, like, oh, you're really in trouble, but you're quieting it. Sometimes there's that level of stress, but you know you're actually acting as like a hero in your own little timeline. And it's like, no, this is just the dragon I'm slaying, and then I save the world or whatever.
I love what you're saying, man. I think I think the examples that you use are really interesting. And I think, a lot of people can probably attest to that and maybe are in one of those moments right now. And I think more interestingly, it's like this dissonance, right? It's like you're getting feedback from people around you, but then you also have this thing that you feel and think. And sometimes those things clash, sometimes they're in harmony, right? And so it's like, how do you deal with that dissonance? Because they're rarely exactly the same. So, but it's like kind of to what extent is there dissonance, in that gap it's an interesting place to explore. So
music is, it's communal. Music is almost not music if it only exists on your hard drive. It's easy to get confused with what people are saying about you.
Yeah, so yeah, it's funny that you say that. A friend of mine, his mother is an author, and his father's a photographer. They both say it's not art unless you share it. So I do think, and it's not to diminish anybody that like is making stuff and not sharing it. It's actually be like, I just encourage people, if you're willing to put in the effort to really make things that you care about and like, be proud enough or brave enough to also publish them.
I totally agree. Anyone who releases music, it's like you're in the top 1% of like creative people. It's just people who are too afraid to do that.
It is, man. It's tough, as we've been talking about. And so I like how you mentioned it's communal. And so I also feel like you have like a very solid and strong perspective on like kind of what's the size of that community that you try to serve as an artist, literally like individually or as a band or whatever. But where do you fall on that sense of like, try to appeal to the largest audience possible versus trying to define like a really specific audience and going about it that way? Is one better than the other? Why do you choose what you choose, and so on?
I think about this a lot because you could argue that the song that gets around most is maybe the best song, because how do you define what a good song is? It's like, well, you don't necessarily look at like Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar and be like, well, there's no orchestral, maybe there even is, but you get my point. There's no string arrangement on that song, so I can't consider it eligible as the best song ever. Like, it's like, okay, that's just one guy's opinion of like what composes, like, well, if it doesn't have all the proper ingredients, then so that seems ridiculous to me. So it's kind of like, it's actually compelling to me to be like, is the best song just the most popular song? Because it is the best at being a song. It is the best at being heard. And you could argue that sometimes that's an engineered, thing that's has nothing to do with the merit of the song, but it's also not irrelevant. Like the nature of the song is not irrelevant to its getting around. Even like songs people love to hate, I'm like, these are arguably amazing songs. They're tapping into something that is so transferable. So I look at that and I'm like, well, I don't think there's necessarily a bad outcome to like if one of my songs went huge. A lot of people would misunderstand it, quote unquote. But I mean, that's even a lie, right? Like there's no misunderstanding it. So now I guess there's like attempting for that to happen or caring about that happening or not happening. I don't think that's something you should get depressed over not having. But there's also people that would be depressed if their song blew up and people were like talking about it some way they didn't understand. And I would much rather embrace that.
Yeah, I love the idea that you just mentioned, which is that there is no misunderstanding it, right? That everybody gets to the relationship that you have with the song is unique when you make it, and nobody is going to have the same one. And everybody's interpretation is unique. And that's kind of the amazing thing about it. That's why you can put out music and have a bunch of people listen to it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, because I definitely have I guess a niche of sorts, but like, and I mean, I do love I like the vibe of having like a small, mighty community where it's like, we get what Jesse's doing, and it's like undeniable. I mean, they could explain it to me in a way that I'd be like, you're picking up on everything and putting it down. But it's like they're gonna be there anyway. I guess that's the other thing. Like, this is all happening at the same time. Many micro and macro communities exist simultaneously for every band, you know.
I also just think it's cool that you just also appreciate, like, as somebody who has a very dedicated niche community of fans, that you acknowledge, like, that you don't turn your nose up at the idea of wider appeal, right? Because I think as fans and as musicians with smaller audiences, it's very common for people to be like, to kind of like just to bash like pop music in a sense, basically, right? And I'll never, like, this has stuck with me for, man, this, I heard this, I mean, years ago, but it was Nile Rodgers talking about like when he was taking guitar lessons with somebody before he was the guy that he like became. And he was one of those people. He was like, I used to turn my nose up at that kind of stuff. And his teacher said to him, who are you to judge a song that speaks to the souls of a million strangers? And I feel like that's kind of the essence of what we're describing. And like, that is such a powerful, and that really does, like, for me, whenever I find myself going to that place, I just like think of that thing. And it's kind of that simple.
That is totally what I'm getting at. Yeah, it's like there's an objectivity to it. Like, I definitely was all about hating on, like, just preemptively hating on whatever was popular. And I've shifted into this philosophy where I'm like, I don't even use the word hate or dislike when talking about music as much as I can, because it seems there's times when I'm tempted to, but like it seems to me almost like scientifically antithetical to my whole thing. It's like, there can't be bad music. What I like to say is the worst song ever, you don't remember, because, well, first of all, it didn't reach you, I guess, but also it it did absolutely nothing for you. You know, the song that you can't stop making fun of is like, hey, it's infected you. It's done its thing as a song. So,
as somebody that has a niche community and a lot of experience in that space, and for people that are interested in, maybe they have something spinning up, maybe they're a little bit farther along, maybe they're starting out, what are things that you would encourage people to embrace or questions to ask themselves as they embark upon that?
I think the most important first thing is like the time aspect. I think this is kind of a lie that gets around about like, oh, you know, overnight success, or like things happen so fast, or like you need things to happen as fast as possible. I don't know. Like, as the sooner you toss that out, the sooner you can get on with the right thing. Because it's like, you have to have experience doing all manner of things. You have to try things for the first time to then get better at doing them. Like, if you're resisting creating your first CD pressing or whatever, because you're waiting for everything to be perfect, it's like, no, your first CD pressing is just not going to be good. It's just not, or whatever. It's not going to be, you know? So it's like, understand that this is a tick mark in the timeline, and that whatever, all of that has to play out. And it's not going to be like this quiet in a cave, like honing, and then you jump out as Prince, and it's like, whoa, you're this sensational, like, life of the party, all alone in your cave. You intuited this. It's like, no, you have to be out there and like screw up or do great or whatever. But all of that aside, you also, to gain like people that really care and want to support you, might want 3 years of watching you to build up that respect. Like, I think there's that other thing. It's not like, oh, you see a band or you hear a song and you're like, I am now a super fan. I'm on their Patreon, bought all their stuff. It's like, that is it. It's probably like, oh, I didn't like, okay, I hated Kid A when I first listened to it, the Radiohead. It's probably like a top 10 album for me now. But it was like, I had to live a whole life with this band to be like, I don't understand this, but I'm growing to understand it. And I like this part of what they do, but not that part. And okay, now I'm watching these videos and that's intriguing. And then somebody else is talking to me about them and, oh, they like Paranoid Android. And then I go into that. And then I listened to In Rainbows in the Car 7 times. And something and this is all happening over the course of maybe years before I'm like a Radiohead stan. And it's like, you have to understand that things just take time and embrace that it's a little bit fateful in that way.
Man, I love. So, I mean, I like say a lot of the same things that you said with like different words, right? That I try to remind people about is that like, and I think the platforms of social media are like a great example of like this idea of like snapshots, right? Like every time we see somebody like that, and the comparisons that we're kind of drawn to make are to these snapshots, right? And to your point, like those snapshots are moments on the timeline of a person's life, career, whatever, that you really don't have visibility into. You know what I mean? But the thing that happens a lot of times implicitly, like in the comparison, is like you're kind of also drawing that story and assuming a lot of other things. And it usually leads you to a place where you're feeling bad about whatever it is that you're doing. And it's a really interesting phenomenon, you know what I mean? Because you're like, everybody does know that like, hey, this is a process. Like even this moment of success that this person has, you don't even know what that looks like to them based on the road that they've traveled or where it is that they'd like to go or where they want to be. So it's really interesting to like freeze a moment of somebody's life, particularly like one that's really like measured by a lot of like kind of standards that you didn't create, you know, and make that a point of comparison to essentially give you a reason to feel bad about what it is that you're doing.
This anecdote's coming to mind. It wasn't even mine, but like my friend Peter is like a fantastic guitarist in Nashville. So he's playing with all sorts of different people. And I remember, this is years old, but he was playing a writer's round with a singer artist of, that he was working with and backing for her. And whatever, played a couple songs at this writer's round. And then he was talking to this woman that watched them afterward. And she was spinning up this story that she like was being earnest, but was like, oh, you two must have like the most, musical, and like, you've probably just been through it. You've probably had all these shows. You've probably gone through some, and he's just like, this is like, I brought charts to this gig and like learned it in my car before, and that's pointing to what you say is like you're posting something saying, I'm releasing this album and, whatever, I feel however you feel about it. And maybe that's positive, maybe that's negative, but one of your fans could be watching and it's like, this is a crazy milestone for him. Like, this is huge news, and that's actually to your benefit as well. Like, you are also benefiting from people who maybe do see you as larger than life. And so I guess to back that up into sort of the it takes time thing, it's like, well, someone won't have that revelation if they didn't see you doing something 3 years ago that they can compare this to, even if you think you've made very little progress in those 3 years. Or you're like, why am I not bigger now? To this one, or to everyone, they're like, you are killing it. And you have to create that story by living it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing to keep in mind, because I think your point about not being in a rush, like essentially having patience, is really important, that you don't decide the timelines on which things happen. And, the idea that you don't have rights, you have the rights to the labor, but not the fruits of it. Right. And so I also, adding on to that, the idea that really, if you embrace that not having a timeline or a deadline for success, that it actually becomes like a competitive advantage in a sense. Because if you're like, oh, I don't have a deadline, I'm just going to keep going. On a longer timeline, a lot of people, as we've talked about, just stop doing it. Do you know what I mean? And so just like out of outlasting, a lot of things can happen on that kind of place when you don't put yourself in a place where you're like, because really at the end of the day, it's like the timeline is no matter what the deadline is you've created for yourself is artificial, you know, having some kind of success in music not happening by a certain date doesn't necessarily change your life.
Yes. Or, same kind of vibe. It's like, 17 years from now, maybe 17 years from now, I get an email where it's like, do you want to open for Dirty Projectors or Dirty Projectors agent? And it's like, holy shit, I didn't think I'd be here, but like just being there to receive that email. But then also to take it further, that gig also might, that's not like heaven, that's not the end of the road either. It's not like that's all I needed this whole time was that huge. It's like, no, that'll also be a thing that comes and goes. And you might reflect and be like, I really thought that would have done more for me. Like, it might also, that dream come true thing might also be another continuation of the story where you're like, man, some days I want to give up, but if I give it another 17 years, Radiohead will ask me, or Radiohead will probably be dead, but 35 years from now, I don't know.
It makes me think of High Fidelity, where like Cusack says he's like, the band that can't stop talking about the night that they opened for Nirvana. It's like the same kind of thing. But yeah, man, I don't know. I think, in that comedian Josh Johnson, he's just like being persistent and patient is like basically kind of the best combination of skills or personality that you can have in terms of how you approach creative work.
I feel that. I mean, yeah, you just won't do your best work if you're always whipping yourself for not hitting a score by a certain time, and this was all in your head anyway. You're just not going to feel good enough to make great music.
If you were to describe the way that you treat yourself as your boss, would you go work for that person?
Right. Fix that equation if your answer is no. Yeah, exactly.
I know you've described your personal philosophy as radical transparency. And I love that. So tell us about that to start with.
Yeah. Well, it's partially natural. It's just like ever since I was a kid, it was like, on AIM, let's say. To me, the point of AIM, even at 14 years old, was not to be like, to me, that seemed like a game of like, okay, if there's now this place where I can interact with all my friends at any moment of the day, basically, then it's basically a game of how deep can every conversation get? Because what are we doing here otherwise? Other than like, oh, meet you at the park and yada, yada, like logistical things. But I guess I just look at interaction and people that way of like, if I'm going to be friends with somebody, we're always going to be going deeper. To me, that's not a friendship is not limited. I'm bringing that up because it's somewhat analogous to like a fan artist relationship. So it's kind of like the same sort of impulses apply, like maybe even tenfold when I'm making a work of art. I'm like, okay, now the impulse is to tell you what this all means is just off the charts. Like I can't let it lie. And there's pros and cons to that, sometimes the mystery or like letting things speak for themselves, like hit harder. But I just love what I'm doing and love what I'm making so much that I'm like, who's interested to hear about like every last thing? Because I want to tell you about it. Again, there's just a selfish impulse of like, I just want to be starting that conversation. But then also it's like, well, how do we get deeper? Like, how do I deepen a fan connection otherwise? I kind of need to imbue something like that somewhere along the line if it's not that exact thing. Like if it's not me being like, let's talk about my music. Who's interested in this? I'll do a podcast on it. I'll do a video on it. We'll do some community things about it. I don't know, like we'll do a poll or this or that. Maybe it's even just, I just did this, like doing a CD release where it just really breaks open, like here's everything that had to do with the making of this album. And then just the deluxe thing that it is also that conversation starter. But my point is, if you're not doing that, then you probably have to do that somewhere else. But it's not going to get deeper between you and your fans by being limited and sterile and distant.
Yeah, interesting, man. I mean, it sounds like you really, in general, value relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess so.
I don't know. I wouldn't describe that tendency as selfish based on what you just told me. Like, to me, it sounds more like there's actually a genuine desire to like connect with people, and that's what it's about. And so I'm wondering, how do you balance like the things that you want to share with understanding how to frame them for people that maybe don't have the context?
One part of me wants to say, like, well, on a very, very micro level, that's kind of like the whole world of content now, right? Is almost like everyone trying to synthesize that into 3 seconds. Be like, how in a flash can I make you go, whoa, that's a musician, and they're probably this and probably that, and they're probably into this, and they've probably gone through that based on the look and the lyric or the text hook or the visual or whatever it is. I guess I'm just trying to point out, like, everywhere you look, connection is a currency of this whole thing. Connection is currency to all of music, whether it is quiet or secret or something you'll never even see. You know, somebody somewhere is listening to something you made and having some kind of really intense reaction to it. And maybe you never know about them, but you are connecting with somebody. And so there's like these oases of connection that you're not really engineering or programming, but then you have your own space where you can program that. And I guess I just look at that whole game board and I'm like, why wouldn't I be at the epicenter of all of the connection?
What does it feel like when it's working?
Obviously, there's a validation aspect, which is pretty surface level. Okay, like yesterday, and this isn't even like, you know, etched into my memory banks as like a canonical fan interaction. This happened yesterday. Someone was like, "Oh, I got your CDs the other day, and I listened to them while searching for my lost cat, which they still haven't found, unfortunately." But they were like, "This was like crucial in like keeping me sane during like and level headed while doing that. You were kind of there for me in that moment." And it feels obviously great, but there's also sort of like it opens up this well of gratitude that I can't ever pour out. It's a faucet of gratitude. It's like, oh my gosh, the way that I wish I could take you to dinner and talk about that for as long as you wanted, times everyone that's ever said something like that to me. That's kind of what it feels like. It's a little bittersweet in a way because it's like, that is amazing, and I can't express my gratitude, which is obviously great. I mean, it's great to feel that like overflowing with it, but it's weird how it's one to many, I guess, as maybe the hang up there. That it's hard to corral everyone and be like, and maybe that's kind of what playing shows is about. The one to many thing, it's like, it's so cool because it's like exponential, but it's also like, I can't store this in myself as one human.
Is there such a thing as too transparent?
I think there are situations where that's true. Where my head went was like, I don't know, maybe you're writing a song and it would be weird if like the whole song was just giving everything away the whole time. And as a result, there was no like uptick or like moment where it clicks. There's certain contexts where like just transparency all the time is like maybe technically inefficient or something. It's like, oh, if you save that for here, if you save that impactful thing for later, it'll hit. Versus it might go over somebody's head or just seem like, oh, there he goes saying anything on his mind again. You know, sometimes you want to step aside and give a sort of State of the Union type thing where you're like, what I'm about to say is very important, you know? So now I guess that means that as long as your relative points of transparency have some dynamic range, you know, you could be very opaque and then be transparent, you know, in one moment, and it'd be like a lightning rod for connection. Maybe in a way that wouldn't occur if you were just transparent all the time. But I guess my point is like you can be transparent all the time, but I do think there's moments where you want to sort of say, hey, what I'm about to say, I know I'm kind of like this by default, but this thing is particularly meaningful, whether you're showing or telling that, but making that known.
I mean, I think connected to this is storytelling. And I know that you feel strongly about it being, a very powerful resource. And what do you mean by that?
Every band that's ever put out a vinyl record, they were all, if you said to all of them, sell me your record, your vinyl record specifically, they wouldn't all say the same thing. They wouldn't all go, well, it's black wax on a 12-inch record, and you can play it back using a needle. It's actually very interesting technology. And yeah, like there's technically music stored on this thing. And it's like, why don't bands why is that an insane thing to say? Why, because it's what's on obviously the record that makes it sellable, or on the cover art. So it's kind of like that simple thought experiment to me kind of reveals like, everything a musician does is just interfacing their story of some kind, whether it's a very quiet story or a very loud one. And it's like, because the main output of a musician is like this intangible of like their story, or their addition to your story, I guess. But again, it's not like, oh, all of their merch or all of their ticket sales or even all of their performances. All of these things are just interfaces to be like, this is who I am. This is what I like. This is where I've come from. Or maybe you're shouting out. You're always saying those things by proxy of just doing it. But sometimes you're also telling somebody else's story, or writing a story about a theoretical other person or something in your song. And again, even if you're an instrumental artist, it's like, I mean, there's all sorts of there's like cult of personalities around jazz musicians who have never sang on a recording. And it's like, his story, her story. Oh, just look at what they were doing there, and then there, and then there, and then, or look at the story of this solo they wrote. This solo in itself is its own little thing that makes me feel. And so it's just kind of like anytime you analyze music, it's like there's a story somewhere, and it just seems to be in the DNA of music. And for that reason, it's like you should probably care about the story you're telling, or just recognize that there is being a story being told.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Remember, Producer Head grows thanks to listeners and supporters like you. So if something here resonates, take a second to let us know by following, liking, subscribing. Your support means everything. By subscribing and sharing, you help us grow the Producer Head community, which allows us to continue bringing you incredible conversations just like this one, and opens the door to even more exciting guests in the future. Let's keep building this together. All right, back to the episode. I talk to people and they're like, I don't have anything to say about, I have this music, I want to share it, but, I have no story. There's nothing interesting about me. And, when those are people you care about, especially, right, and know, it's like, it's never something you like to hear somebody say. And I also just genuinely believe that like everybody does have their story and that thing that is unique and special about them. I'm wondering, can you speak to how you found that for yourself, and maybe what you can offer questions people can ask themselves to get more in touch, build better awareness around what that is for them? It's the kind of thing where it's like, it can be hard to see, like, you can't see the air, you know what I mean? And it's sort of that thing where it's like, you have to learn, I think, to develop, what is that thing that's intangible, as you described?
I think a very practical thing somebody could do is analyze their own output. Like, because you've probably been, so this is the weirdly ironic thing about all of this is like, if you're outputting music, you are telling a story, which means you can go read your own story and start to understand it. Because I totally understand, like, my story on paper is pretty bland, maybe.
Wait a second, because this is a great example, right? So what makes your story bland?
Here is the bland version of my story up to now, right? It's kind of like, well, I lived in Binghamton, New York for 23 years, went to K through 12 in college, made a bunch of music, and then I moved to Nashville where I kept making music, and the music got a little bit different. It's not like, oh, and then my uncle died and that changed my world. Like, there's nothing about, at least if you're asking about my musical story, it's like, okay, you could argue maybe there's some relationships I was in and out of that were like really key points of inspiration for certain albums. But even that's pretty bland. It's like, oh, like I went through a breakup that really affected me. in the middle of all that. But yeah, I just kept making music through it all, and it's been fun, you know? But for example, you can zoom in and be like, and again, not even like you're some fat cat, like cigar chomping, you know, exec that's like, sex up this story and make it sellable, like to yourself. Like you don't want to have that. I'm saying just looking back at your life and being like, what have I really been doing here? What's actually interesting about it? Because you aren't gonna think your story is interesting, but people watching a musician be a musician is gonna be like, whoa, that unrelatable to me. Like you are a circus act. Like this is wild, you know, to like a layman. So it's kind of like, well, you're not going to see how remarkable you are. So yeah, it's kind of like you can sort of reflect on your own work and kind of be like, you know, again, I'm struggling to. I don't want to answer the question of in a way of being like, here's how to develop a brand from like a self marketing, you know, and this is your solution. I'm just kind of saying you can look at the clues you've laid for yourself to sort of make some revelations about who you are.
What have been some of those big clues in your own process?
When I moved to Nashville, immediately it was like blindsided by like the quality of music. But also at first it was like, whoa, everyone can play amazingly. Everyone has played their instrument better than I've seen anyone play an instrument. But then you kind of you start to understand like, oh, a lot of this though, like sure that's happening, but a lot of this is kind of corporate or by the books or like dime a dozen or not inspirational to me. And so you're like, okay, then you kind of ease back. And then I realized like, whoa, I made all this music as basically a kid in New York with like no reference point. Like there were no billboards being like, here's this glossy act breaking out, or like couldn't even really in Binghamton, it was not a big city. There were great musicians around, but it's not like you would go to a show and be like, whoa, I can do it that way. It was just kind of like I was one of the most active musicians in that city. You know, it's like, so you move to Nashville, you're like, oh, I've been doing this in like a psycho lab with nobody peer reviewing my stuff. And that's why my stuff sounds like it. And actually, whoa, I'm actually kind of an outcast. And why is that? And it's like, well, then you can keep pulling the thread and being like, and start to see it in your music about like, oh, I'm very countercultural in this way, or I've never connected with this idea, or I've always had low self-esteem about this thing, and you'll see it in lyrics and you'll see it in and it's like all of a sudden you're synthesizing to go back to like fan connection. It's like, okay, now you start to see it in all the people that listen to your stuff. It's like people like my stuff because they probably have felt like I have at some point.
Where does confidence come from?
The thing about me with confidence in music is that I am unnaturally confident in the music world. Not to say like, oh, I can outplay anyone, or it's just saying like, if you can't make me feel bad about my music. If somebody's like, your music sucks, like this is going on, I have this musicological reason for saying I don't like it, or like I just don't like it, or this is cringy. It just does not work on me. I'm just like, I get why you don't get it, like that's all there is to it. And where does that come from? I don't know entirely. I think it partially comes from the genuine want to do it. It's like the whole reason this started out because it was just like, oh, that looks like it would be fun to make music. So it's kind of like, I don't know, if you're alone in a room putting a puzzle together because it's fun to you, and then someone comes in and starts criticizing how you're building the puzzle, you're just going to be like, can you just go away? Like, instead of being like, you know what? You're right. I shouldn't build puzzles anymore. I feel terrible about this. Like, that would be an outsized emotional reaction. And that's kind of how I look at it. Is like, if somebody wants to poke their head into what I'm doing and be like, I think this whole thing is garbage. It's like, you're not part of this. Like,
yeah, I mean, you've mentioned this to me before, right? Which is this idea of like, in a musical context, and when it comes to your art specifically, you feel impervious to the haters. And so it sounds like that's just maybe like something you were just naturally inclined and born with.
I think it could be. It's weird because Okay, I'll go down this road a little bit. Like, I have had many bouts with like terrible self-image and like being very much not confident in many areas of my life. And one of the now that I'm looking back at it, probably one of the lowest moments in my life, it kind of put me into therapy, and I went through several sessions with this therapist, and she said something that was just like perfect that I've never forgot about. Because I was talking about this. I was talking about like when it comes to music, I was comparing myself to some other people, and it got to the point of music, and I was like, oh, well, when it comes to music, like I can outplay them. I have more going for me in this realm. And also just generally, like, not that am always going through this in my head, but we were digging into this topic, like explore this comparison thing. And it was just also this concept of, yeah, but generally people can't get me down about music. Also, it's just something that seems asynchronous with criticism. It's like, it's not even about, you can't criticize it. It's just something I'm doing, and I just see through that or whatever. And then she was like, well, so you know what it feels like to, have confidence. Can you imagine just borrowing from that well and like putting it over into this other area of your life? And I think the sort of checkmate things that happen in therapy, I think, are so funny because you go in and you're like, I am Edgar Allan Poe. Like, you can't make me feel better. And then they're just like very they're very logically like, so you said this, and but what about that? And then you're kind of like, yeah. Like you don't want to be like, and it's perplexing. You're like, okay, well, I'm not ready to be happy yet.
Yeah. Do you want to be happy or do you want to be right?
Right. Exactly. So, for me, it was that kind of checkmate thing where I was just like, well, that's a good point, but maybe tomorrow I'll feel it. So yeah, it is weird because on one hand, I think I was, or maybe in this lane of things, I was somewhat born with this imperviousness to like, well, when it comes to your creations, you're very unbothered. But there's many times where I walk into a party and I'm not really much anymore, but walk into a party and my mood is shattered because I'm the shortest guy there. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's just a thought I'm having that's ruining that's just shattering my confidence. And it's just all, but you're making me realize maybe I've gone to music. Maybe that's where I sought my invincibility out. Maybe I found it there.
What about also the idea that you have an extensive body of work in music? Like you have very tangible things that you can point to that go like, look, like I'm not just saying I do music, like I do music and here is the proof.
I think that's real. Yeah. To be like, the paper trail is like inarguable. If you really want to hate on my music, go to this 15-year-old album I made. Like you'll really hate that. But the point is, like, you can't talk. I can. It's like you're already so late to the party if you want to hate on my music and now.
That said, how do because you do have a fan base, how do the opinions of others that maybe are fans and maybe that are hypothetical ghosts, how do those voices appear or come into play while you're making music or while you're promoting your music and so on?
Well, I guess mostly don't. When I'm thinking of like your average Instagram commenter or something, like I'm not really thinking of what anyone like, and I'm never thinking of that kind of person while making something. But I am thinking of like peers and musicians I respect and friends that are like one of my best friends, Aaron, who plays my band a lot. He's like a super, he's like he has a master's in composition. So it's like when he says something, it's kind of like, well, objectively, you should heed that. It's like this is the authority in your life being like, I would move that note down a half step. And it's kind of like, all right, maybe that's the one time where that butts up against my instinct or feeling, and I might, but that's pretty much it. And usually that is coming way later in the process. Usually it's like all feeling. Now, when something's done and I'm ready to share it, a lot of times I do feel like, man, like, I don't know if people are really it would be cool if everyone was like, this is the coolest thing ever. but it always almost seems like impossible. My music always feels like a little tough to just drop into the world and be like, everyone will be really vibing to this immediately with no explanation. Because it does seem maybe like there's some onboarding that could be beneficial for people.
Onboarding. I mean, so therein lies the storytelling piece, though, right? I mean, that's sort of where that bridge is important.
Yeah, I think so. And as I was saying that, like I was kind of thinking, like when I'm releasing something, I'm mostly thinking of my existing fan base. Be like, well, they love it, and I'm kind of assuming no one will really pick it up. But I guess that's the feeling I'm having when you ask about like, oh, do you think about other people? I think about sort of I have maybe this skepticism that the world will just glom on to my next single if I'm making it, you know, because I don't make things to be glommed on by everyone. I guess I am thinking about what my existing fan base will think about it, or if they think like, oh, this is like a shift, but I don't think it typically affects things.
Well, I mean, that's like a funny scenario to imagine, like an ironic scenario, right? Where you're like, I'm this tortured artist and nobody could ever understand me, and then you drop a song and a million people love it, right? And you're like, so it's a million people immediately are on board with what you're doing. Are there things that the voices of other people have helped you, like encourage you to do things that maybe you wouldn't have done, or discourage you? Like there are things that maybe you're still not reaching for because of, like it may not even be another person, it could just be some kind of internal voice that you've inherited or that you have for some reason.
Yeah, I definitely have had some like susceptibility to a lot of the common things you hear when you're making music, which I'm sure you've heard about. Like, I don't know, like you'll make something and then one of your friends or an acquaintance will just insist, like, dude, like if this was mastered with on Music Row, like it would actually be worth something. Like it, and that's how I take it. Is always like, oh, like some people will just look at your thing and be like, in so many words, this is not a final mix. You should know that. I know what a final mix is like. And you don't have the ability to know that until you give it to somebody else or something. I don't know. And maybe that there's some projection going on there, but I feel like these are common like gauntlets that musicians go through where you put something out and all of a sudden you get this like, you should think more about mixing, or you should take vocal lessons, or like you should get it properly mastered. And so much of that sticks for so long. And then you realize like, oh, I've been on this almost capitalistic journey of like making my drums sound incredible. And that's mostly what I've been doing here. I haven't really been like breathing out music. And, it's like, no, I've been trying to impress someone who's forgotten about me. I really want to get off of all of that.
I mean, I can only imagine because living in Nashville of all places, like I have had the pleasure of visiting there a few times, and yeah, the baseline level of musicianship is like you said, man. I mean, it's kind of wild how well people are just playing the guitar there or any of those instruments. I mean, it's wild. All the respect in the world for it, but I can only imagine that extends to studio people and mixing and engineering and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of also strong opinions, and because of the presence, there is also an economy there that's just way more visible and physical there than I think it is in other places too. I can imagine that the pressure there is as a result like shows up in those kinds of ways.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the something else of just like in Binghamton, zero of that. It was good. It was good to like grow up musically there with no very much sandbox type environment, and then come here and be like, okay, if you were to cultivate this into something like sellable, now you're facing all of these like hardcore processes.
Well, so that actually makes me want to ask you about something that I wasn't planning on asking you, but the important parts are like the philosophy behind structuring a creative process that is a good fit for yourself, right? Because I think that especially like when you have access to all the gear and you can like live in your room, and in the context of all the internet social media stuff, there's this sort of like Frederick Taylor, like industrial revolution kind of mindset around like pumping out music, right? Like I need to like churn out, like, it's like we like start to treat music as a Ford factory. You know what I mean? And I think my personal opinion, is like you can try to do that, and maybe you should if you think that's worthwhile, so that you can find out that it's not the way firsthand. But you could save yourself a lot of trouble and time, in my opinion, if you accept that that's not the case. And I'm wondering, though, how you think about, like, because again, like, regardless of like the gear that you're using and the kind of music that you make, I think part of what you just alluded to in the Binghamton story and like that context is like how much like that environment and that influence around your life helped you make that music without kind of like the boundaries or the context to kind of fit into a certain place. And that you're now probably in a lot of ways more proficient and more skilled, but that like those unfiltered ideas and having those documented really have so much to do now to get like used and passed through the skill that you now have. It's a broad question, but yeah, the idea of like the way that you think about developing process in a way that fits and works well for you.
This is really good because I'm thinking a lot about it right now. Yeah, like in Binghamton, I made 6 albums that I ended up considering like demos and kind of like taking off the internet. But the whole vibe with those 6 albums was like, I was in Binghamton. I had no reference point for music making. I had no one's voice in my ear. So it was just like, you're dying to say something. Let's learn how to say it. And it was just like on my HP laptop, like learning how to use Ableton. And basically those 6 albums were, you're learning how to be a semi-competent music producer with modern technology. And then when I moved to Nashville, it was like, okay, so you've got those base things worked out. Now we can create some like great albums, and you have access to a string quartet or a mastering engineer, And then I did an EP and 3 albums that way. And in that process, same thing. It's like, okay, we got the base idea of recording music on a laptop or a computer or whatever. Then it became like, all right, now we've got network and we've got more gear and we've got effects and you've built up your studio. And now it's this thing that was a laptop and a bunch of gear is a Mac Mini and a bunch more gear. And this year I started to make an album, which I may still finish, but I ended up releasing just 3 songs, what it was going to be, and calling it an EP. But as I was moving into those, I mean, there was some great stuff that was happening, but it was just becoming so slow and so scary. And this goes back to way earlier when we were talking about like, oh, good stress versus bad stress. And it became a bad stress thing where it's like, it started to feel like sitting in that fucking room again, sitting at that same situation and doing the same things to make music sounds stressful. But then another voice was like, yeah, but we got to make an album. And I was listening to that voice before I was like, I don't need to do any of this, And I was telling you before we recorded, like I found this Boss sampler, the SP202 at a pawn shop like a few weeks ago. And it was something I had always wanted since I was a kid. And bringing it home, I just had this revelation. I was like, this is unlocking something. This idea of like going out into the world, finding inspiration and being like, let's chase this thing. Instead of being like, well, you have to go into the studio and you have to take whatever inspiration you find and filter it through this process you've done a million times. It's like, wait, what if we didn't make the next album on a computer? And it's just like, as soon as I told myself, like, you don't have to use a computer and produce like the shiniest recording you've ever done every time. Like this weight came off my shoulders and it was like, oh, that is the key right there. Like that feels so good that means like that's the divergent path I'm now. So it's interesting because who knows where that leads. I might get right back into the computer situation tonight. I don't know. But the point is, when you're asking about process, like for so long, it was basically one process that just got stronger for 15 years. Now I'm kind of like looking at it as like, okay, how interesting is it to get 5% better when I could just burn it all down and be like, well, let's see what the strengths I built apply to this total Wild West approach.
It does sound like, man, I mean, that you do have a high level of self-awareness. And I do think that plays a role in like your ability, like when you mentioned, right, like you're asking, because you kind of describe this process and what it sounds like from the outside is you ask yourself these series of questions and you kind of log your kind of like primal response to them, like emotionally, like the words aside, just how they make you feel. And you even said like the weight was lifted, right? So it's like, you do know that. And so I'm wondering if like, Is that something you've consciously developed? And is there things that you do to develop that? Because I think that's something that's come out throughout the conversation that I just think is a really like notable like talent that you have for yourself.
As a kid, I was always sort of I don't know if I came off this way to people, but like, fancied myself like the smartest guy in the room. And like, that is a weird paradox because it's like when you feel like that, you're probably not self-aware, but you're also think you are because you're like, well, if I'm the salt of the earth. I'm all about philosophy and thinking deeply about things. Oh, that's baby shit. That was step one, was like self-awareness. But it's a great way to trick yourself out of actually never confronting it. I guess the point of bringing that up is to say I've always had a propensity for like going there to these like going deep, as we've said many times. I do think that's a necessity to be like, but you have to want to do that to kind of get into the muck of whatever you're dealing with, like figure it out. But no, I think it was not like a lot of people have like a wellness, renaissance or like this arc that they're on. And like, I don't think that ever happened at like, I don't think there was a moment where it was like, all of a sudden it clicked that but music, I'm realizing was probably a lot of that self, perpetuating things where it's like, again, back to all sorts of stuff. Like, you look back at some albums you made and you're like, oh, I thought I was being like my first album. It's like this concept album about this guy that was not me,
I have this friend.
Yeah. I'm asking for a friend. And I look back at it and I'm like, dude, that is the most like edgelord fucking like, is the most coded language for like, I am depressed. But you're like, oh, I have this idea for this character, But 6 albums later, you're like, okay. And then you see it bubble up again later. And I think there's stuff like that makes you be like, oh, I was kind of a dickhead here. Or maybe still, And then you go through some stuff where, again, like, I definitely went through some stuff where it really knocked me on my ass in a way that I was like confused by. And it was just a matter of necessity about like, you're so broken right now that the way out is like confronting some of this stuff. And that like kind of put me in therapy and things, which whatever, that one thing isn't what fixed me forever by any means or anything. But I do think it's a little bit necessity of like, well, you stumble and then you're like, I need to get better. And then you're kind of have to learn this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you point to something that I think is actually really cool, man. And I think it links even to the storytelling piece of this when we were trying to help people think about how they could get in touch with their story. And your response was, well, look at your music that you put out, right? And as you just described that earlier project, I'm like, okay, if you're making music that's like honest, right? Even if at the time you don't even know, like maybe at the time you really were fooling yourself and you're like, this is somebody else, right? But if you're making music that is coming from a genuine place, you do then get this externalization of like whatever that was, right? And then you kind of, the beauty of that is you now can kind of look at something very personal with a little bit of distance, right? And therein lies like kind of like the arc that you're referring to and maybe recurring themes in your own music over time. And so that also links back to the idea of being able to like, here's information you can use for your story that's very honest and real that you've laid out and maybe we're unaware of. So that's a really interesting piece that you just mentioned, man.
Yeah, no, I think it's dead on. Like, I think all of this comes with the realization that it's like, okay, as a musician, and it also ties into the concept of celebrity or whatever, but it's like the whole idea of you being a musician is somewhat related to like you're broadcasting your life story because you're the brave one to do it. Honestly, like you're the brave, you are relatively more brave than the average person to the point of being like, I'm going to make an effort to share what I'm going through with everyone. And that is really what makes you remarkable. So it's kind of just like, I have this commitment to, it's like a weird covenant you make with yourself or whatever. It's like the life I've chosen is one where I have a duty to be like, this is what I'm going through. And that's the whole thing right there.
Now that we've talked about some of the lighter things, I want to ask you a few questions about time management. So as we've kind of gone through over the course of this conversation, there's so many things that you're doing, right? And I think for a lot of people listening, like it's the same thing, right? You're making the music, and then you're potentially mixing and mastering that music. You're thinking about creating some sort of content to share with people, some kind of medium beyond the music itself to let people know about it. And maybe you're playing gigs, maybe there's administrative stuff, you're dealing with emails, who knows what else. And then maybe on top of that you have a job, so thinking about, you can't do all of those things in one day on a consistent basis, right? And so I'm just curious about, looking into the way that you think about prioritization, the way that you structure your time.
I have a very straightforward philosophy with this that I would think should click with literally everyone. To me, it's very intuitive, but I get that maybe there's more to it than that. But like the premise of all of this is like, first of all, I like doing all of this. Sure, some things are more enjoyable than others, but the whole idea is like, if it is a component of pushing my music forward, it is of interest and pleasurable to me in some fashion. So with that being the preface, like there's nothing on my to-do list that I'm not pumped to do in some level. So that's good. That alone kind of means like, okay, it's kind of just going to move itself along a little bit. Now, when it comes down to, you have a limited amount of time and you have to do something. I'm not one to like punt stuff. I'm definitely pretty applied. Like I don't necessarily feel good about being like taking a week, like just being like, what am I going to do tonight? I don't know. I'm just going to play video games or whatever it is. And doing that a few nights in a row, like that bad stress would start to set in for me. So it's kind of like most nights, it's like, I want to do something after my day job, which I also do have. And I look at my to-do list and it's like, again, there's some things that, have to happen and soon. And then there's some things that you want to do more than others. For me, it's pretty simple. It's like, if I look at my to-do list, the thing that I want to do most jumps out at me. I'm just going to do that because you don't have to feel bad about it. I have to sign so many CDs a week. And like, there are times when I'm spending 2 hours signing CDs and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not working on that other thing. And then I'll just be like, you have to do this at some point. And it's just of interest to you now. And for whatever reason, it's working with your mood or it's working with the timeline or it's a good night to do it or you're kind of underslept and you don't want to do something intense. This is a perfect time to do it, And it's like things kind of self-select in a way that usually that guiding principle usually just the order of operations ends up pretty good, I think. The first step of this whole thing is just to recognize like everything we've said already, which is like, 1, I'm here because I like doing all this stuff. 2, the rush is purely self-imposed. It's like if we know those basic premises, it's like, well, then you can literally do anything in any order and it's not a bad situation. And, occasionally, a couple nights a week, you should hang out with friends.
Yeah, talk about balance a little bit, man, because I think, especially when you're talking about this, and if you decided to spend all your time working on this stuff and you have a job, you could easily not see people, So you do kind of have to make that conscious decision to do that. And so I'm wondering if you can just speak to like what a balanced life looks like to you, and maybe like what are like kind of little indicators that you realize like maybe when you're like kind of falling out of balance.
Such a good question. First of all, yeah, I agree. Like, and I definitely like unabated could go like weeks just working till 2 a.m. every night and loving it. Like, I'm definitely that of much of a workaholic. And I'm sure there's people listening, watching that are of that stripe if they're in this world of music making and stuff. But again, it goes back to like the bad stress or whatever. Which this is a sneaky one, right? Because it's so easy to be like, give yourself accolades for working 13 days in a row. But there's just sort of like laws of physics or something where it's like, if I go 4 days in a row without hanging out with a friend or seeing a show or going on a date with my girlfriend or whatever it is, you'll start to see, the proverbial grease build up on your, stove or whatever. And it's just kind of like, whether you feel like it or not, you should probably schedule some time to touch grass, basically. Because, you'll start to see, and it goes back to self-awareness too, but like, you'll start to realize the ways that you're getting cornered, or like your best work isn't happening anymore, or some like a low grade depression kind of sets in. And it's just like, don't forget that you just need to, be a part of a community and see people and like see something else and just refill that tank a little bit. I also like, there's some non-negotiables, I guess, like every day after work, but before I move into music stuff, I take a walk, and I also have to do yoga 3 times a week. So it's like, those are kind of sacred. Like nothing should be so important that those don't happen. And that's just something I know, to where it's just like, it just keeps it light and keeps the gears turning.
Let me ask you about, like, so the walk, is that something, are you headphones? Is it phoneless? Is it like, how long is it? You go to the same places every time? Is it random?
It's usually AirPods, and often a podcast or sometimes a record. And I usually do the same route around my neighborhood. I definitely could do other stuff, but yeah, it's mostly just about like, get out of the house. Yeah, it's not so much a like sort of divining inspiration thing. It's kind of just like, before you sit in a different chair and look at a different screen, maybe make sure you don't do that for at least 30 minutes.
Yeah, 100%. And what podcasts are you usually listening to while you take that walk?
Well, I am a big fan of this podcast called Get Played, which is a gaming podcast. They're all very funny on there, but they're also talking about like games that are coming out. And they're also like revisiting old stuff. They're just talking about gaming stuff, which is fun. I also listen, weirdly, I don't think people would expect this of me, I listen to a lot of Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard. And they have this segment every Friday where like fans call in and they just tell their craziest stories. And for whatever reason, love that segment.
That's cool. That's very like old school talk radio, or like, that's
yeah. It is. Or like that Scritti Politti album. Like,
yeah, I was just curious. And then the yoga class, is that something that you'll do like a class at home? Is there a studio that you go to?
I did it alone. So in college, I took a class on it, and that's like how I got my sort of knowledge base for it. And then since then, I've been doing it alone for a long time. And then I moved into this house, and there's a hot yoga studio down the road, and like I just started going, and now it's like a must do. I'm like, okay, I never do yoga at home now. It's like, it seems unimaginable, but it's interesting. Like, I guess this is also just a general tip, but like, if I had no friends, but I went to this hot yoga studio, that would be doing a lot for me, to just be like, you don't really leave this house. However, 3 times a week, you're going to this yoga studio where a bunch of people know your name and know your face, and maybe you strike up some conversations every so often. Like, just that little touch of community, that it's just wild to be like, just start going to a yoga studio and you will now have some friends and some accountability and some people and a reason to get off the couch. Like, I think stuff like that's important.
Any upcoming projects or past projects about a friend of yours that you want to highlight or share with the people listening?
Funny you should phrase it that way, because I have a new project that's also an old project coming out. It's being rolled out, but there was 6 albums I made in Binghamton. The 4th one I made was called Good Binary Code, and it was, I think, probably the best of those 6. So I went back and I like re-recorded it all from scratch, and I'm been releasing those songs, and they're getting like, new merch, new content. Like, we're kind of treating it like a whole new album, because most people haven't heard it. So yeah, this whole year we're doing singles and a couple more releases, like CD and vinyl, I believe. And I'm also touring in August with a band called Death Rally from Denver.
Where are you going on the tour? By the way, I love the name, Good Binary Code. That's great.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I always did like that too. I'm going to Wichita, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, Chicago, Illinois, Madison, Wisconsin, Davenport, Iowa, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Omaha, Nebraska.
That's a lot. How many days are you doing all that in?
I think that's 8 shows. Yeah, 8 shows across 9 days, I believe.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Congrats on booking that, man. That'll be really fun.
Yeah, thanks. It will be. It'll be good.
Yeah, to anybody listening, if you're in any of those places, go check out Basic Printer. And where do you want to send people to connect with you? Where's the best place you like to have people have that first touch point?
Instagram, Instagram probably a good place to start, and then hit the link in bio and do anything that's of interest to you. You can also just go to basicprinter.com and everything will be there. I definitely keep that up to date.
And the handle on Instagram?
At Basic Printer.
At Basic Printer and basicprinter.com, everybody. He spells it like a normal person, so no trouble finding him there. So with that, man, I just have a couple of these, more than a couple, but these little shorter form questions, but feel free to be as short or long-winded as you please. Which DAW do you use?
I use Ableton.
3 favorite albums?
Get to Heaven by Everything Everything. Man, did people really get stopped up on this when you ask them?
Yeah, often is the case, which is why I love the question.
It's great.
It's kind of an idiotic question, but it's also like a very relevant and fun question.
Yeah, I feel good about the Get to Heaven pick. Dandelion Gum by Black Moss Super Rainbow. And, oh man, just like looking at my record. Okay, yeah, it's called With Greg from Deerhoof by Serengeti. It's a weird title, but it's a Serengeti / Greg Saunier album.
Best music related purchase you've ever made for $100 or less?
Such a good question. $100 or less? Okay, I'll this feels not totally true to my heart, but like you'll see the like I got iConnectivity, that brand, they do like all the playback and like in-ear stuff. Not in-ear, but mostly playback, and like they had like it's a MIDI interface like that big, and it just has a USB on the front, and then it's just got a pair of like ins and a pair of outs, 5-pin, and maybe also like a host port, like a standard USB, for $15.
Oh wow!
And it's just like the most useful. It's just like no nonsense. You can control MIDI things with this. You can put it in your pocket.
Something you bought and never used.
Oh man. There's definitely something. Okay, well, there's something I bought and haven't used yet, but it has been months, so it counts. Stylophone?
No.
Okay, Stylophone. It was. It's a brand name, but they also created the Stylophone, which was like a little synthesizer with like a touch controller, like a ribbon controller. It was like from years past, but they have been making some new stuff, and they made this drone type synth called the DSM-2, I think. And I did buy that, but I haven't used it yet. And it was maybe been like 5 months.
One habit that gets in the way of your music?
Maybe like YouTube rabbit holes. Like every night I need like an hour of crazy YouTube rabbit holes. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's not getting in the way. Maybe that's ultimately helpful, but it's just something that if I'm like, okay, if I didn't have that in my life, what else? Would I be making more music? Probably.
Something you wish more people understood about music and or production?
It's somewhat cliche, but just like done is better than perfect kind of thing. Like if you're releasing stuff, you probably felt like there's albums you're thinking of where you're like, they definitely hit send and we're like, we are so satisfied with every corner of this out. Like, no, they're probably like, that bass is too quiet, but what? It's been 7 years. We got to release it. So just know that it's like you probably not have a pure sense of satisfaction of when you publish anything.
Someone else you'd like to hear from on Producer Head?
I'm thinking of some friends, but I'm also thinking about like, are you asking because it's like, oh, I'm going to send this to them and see if they want to do it?
I mean, it's a combination of things. I think part of it is expanding my own, because like I have these people that I look, you know what I mean? But the production world is a lot bigger than the world that like I quote unquote exist in musically. So it's partially that, and partially like, who are other people that could potentially be good for this that I don't already know. And yeah, a lot of the people on this show have helped me become aware of those people. Some of them I end up becoming guests. Some of them don't. You know what I mean? I think either way, I think at the core, it's about its awareness, I guess.
The truest answer is Tom Feck from Black Monster Rainbow Tobacco. It would be amazing to have a 2-hour podcast of him getting this because he doesn't.
And it sounds like he's a tough guy to lock down for this kind of thing.
Yes, but in terms of attainable people that probably would do it, that I'd be interested to have them go through this. My friend Attila, who was featured on my few songs now, one of my recent songs, I think she would love to do this. And she is a monster producer.
Favorite movie?
I was not very much a movie person for many, many, many years. I'm starting to become one. So recently things have started to, enter the top, my favorite movie slot and be like, oh, I didn't know what was out there. Now that I know what's out there, these things are. And like for a while it was The Game with Michael Douglas. And now it is absolutely The Substance. Have you seen that movie?
I have not, man. I have a couple of friends that have been raving about it though. Yeah.
It is the best movie I've ever seen. I watched it late at night, and then the next afternoon I watched it again. I couldn't be away from it.
Well, man, that sounds like an interesting one to watch right before bed.
Yeah.
Advice that you've received and used.
Don't give up.
What character from a book, movie, or show do you most identify with?
I have such a douchey answer, which is like Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. I've always felt like that. I mean, that's why that book is so. I don't feel like him a lot anymore, but I would say, like I was kind of bred in that disposition. Like I deeply, deeply relate to that core tendency to be that way.
Yeah, the classic for a reason, man.
Mm-hmm.
So this question was left for you from the previous guest. What are you doing to support the music community locally and or more broadly?
Well, I mean, for sure, there's what I do at my day job, which is directly like helping musicians market themselves in very unambiguously successful ways. Like the whole point of our job is not to, trick someone into being like, hey, that number went up by like 1,000 and let me make sure you feel good about that before you realize it's not really going to do anything. There's been a number of people I've personally like worked with where it's like the transformational, like on a monetary or like emotional scale. I mean, the people have different goals. Yeah, the greatest service. I mean, yes, it's a private company, a for-profit company, whatever. But like the work I'm doing there, I think is the way I've been the most of service to other musicians for sure. It's a little different of an answer than I was expecting to give. Because my initial impulse, which was also sort of a non-answer, is just be like, I'm doing it. I'm if you're out there creating fans or putting on shows or playing in shows or just being a part of just being in it with other people, like I think that's enough to be like, if you're in the fabric and pushing it along and you're a good, actor in all of it, I think you should feel pretty good about you're probably at plenty of service just by being around.
That's all I have for you, man. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the people listening before we get out of here?
Probably not. I've talked a lot to here today.
That's why you're here, man.
I feel good about it.
But yeah, man, I mean, thank you so much for making the time to do it and just for being as transparent with both things musically and otherwise, in your life. I think we really got to know you in this conversation. And yeah, your commitment to just being creative and being as corny as it sounds to say, like, but truly like authentic to who you are and what it is that you want to communicate through your music is not unappreciated or unnoticed. And thanks so much for making the time to be here, man.
Dude, thanks. Yeah, thank you even more. This was perfect. I was really glad to do it.
Right on, man. Everybody, that concludes another episode of Producer Head. This has been Toru, and in a way, so are you. Peace. That's a wrap of my conversation with Basic Printer, Jesse's philosophy of radical transparency, And the full stack approach to independent music really challenges the traditional boundaries of what it means to be a musician in today's landscape. I hope that you enjoyed it and take this with you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. This helps Producerhead find its place and its people. Without you, there is no Producerhead. Thanks again for tuning into Producerhead. Subscribe and join our community over at producerhead.substack.com so you never miss an episode. Substack subscribers receive exclusive access to the bi-weekly podium, the curation of my favorite discoveries on and offline over the past week. You'll also get access to Producerhead Bars, where I share the best of what's been shared with me to help you and other producers in our community grow. The podium and Producerhead Bars are designed to provide immediate inspiration and direct application in your creative process. So, subscribe at producerhead.substack.com to receive real inspiration and ideas you can use to elevate your own process today. If you care for the craft, get your exclusive access at producerhead.substack.com. This episode was co-produced, engineered, and edited by Matthew Diaz. Big thank you to him. From Producerhead, this is Toru, and in a way, so are you. Peace.